We were taught wars and empires rise and fall because of kings, assassinations, and ideology. But beneath the speeches and flag lies steel railways that quietly redraw maps, move armies, and decide who becomes rich and who stays a colony. This video will connect four iron rods: the Berlin-Baghdad Railway that terrified Britain, Indian railways funded by Indian taxpayers but designed for British power, the US railroad built on Chinese migrant labor, the Trans-Siberian Railway that welded the Russian Empire together. Let's start with the Berlin-Baghdad Railway link. In 1900, the British Empire controlled the world trade through two assets: the Royal Navy and the Suez Canal, the fast route to India. A German financed Berlin Baghdad Railway promised a direct land route from Europe to the Persian Gulf, bypassing British sea power, and threatened London's grip on India and the Middle Eastern oil. German companies backed by Deutsche Bank secured mineral rights along the line in Mesopotamia, meaning Germany would tap into vast oil reserves just as navies were switching from coal to oil. But for Britain, this was unacceptable. A rival empire gaining secure overland access to the very fuel that powered the Royal Navy. Diplomacy, finance, and propaganda were used to block the project. Britain pressured the ruler of Kuwait into agreements that blocked a German controlled Gulf terminus. British capital was withheld from the railway, and the press demonized it as a geopolitical threat, not just a trade route. When the World War I began, the unfinished gaps in the line crippled Ottoman logistics, while Britain moved to secure Basra, Mosul, and key oil regions, later carving the Middle East along the lines that often mirrored the route and the oil zones. While the British were destroying railway projects in West Asia, they were also trying to consolidate their grip on India by building railways. In India, the British justified railways as a gift of civilization, but the financial architecture tells a different story. By 1908, British Indian Railways had attracted about £274 million of investment, heavily underwritten by guarantees and capital drawn from Indian taxpayers and Indian treasury. Private British railway companies received assured returns, often 5%, protected by the colonial government, while the risk and repayment burden ultimately fell on the Indian revenues. Strategically, the network served three British goals: rapid movement of troops to crushing uprising and defend frontiers in the great game against Russia, cheap transport of raw cotton, grains, and other commodities from the interiors to the port of British industry and export market. Tariff and charges on rail traffic generated income from the colonial administration, again drawn from Indian economic activity. For many Indians, railway meant land disposition, disruption of traditional trade routes, and famines exacerbated by grains being shipped out even when the local regions were starving. Just like the Berlin Baghdad Railway, the Indian railway grid was a tool to lock a region into someone else's imperial supply chain, only this time the colony itself paid for the privilege. Across the Atlantic, another empire scale corridor was being built: the US Transcontinental Railroad linking the Atlantic and Pacific coasts. Between the 1860 and 1869, an estimated 13,000 to 15,000 Chinese laborers built roughly 660 to 700 miles of the Central Pacific Line from Sacramento to Promontory Summit, often forming 80 to 90% of the workforce. These men blasted tunnels through the Sierra Nevada, hung from cliffs with baskets to place explosives, laid tracks in deep snow and scorching heat, and did most of the dangerous work, often without machinery and for half to two-thirds the wages of white workers. Their labor allowed the United States to move the troops quickly from conflicts in the West, open up the interiors for settlement, mining, and agriculture, project economic and military power to the Pacific coast and beyond. Yet, when the golden spike was driven in 1869, Chinese workers were excluded from the iconic celebration and later faced harsh exclusion laws. even as their rail made coast to coast American power possible. The lesson mirrors Baghdad. Infrastructure that looks like national progress is often built on invisible, expendable labor in service of strategic control of land, resource, and trade routes. Another major player of the great game of 19th century, Russia was also trying to reaffirm the control over the massive continent-sized country. In the late 19th century, Russia faced pressure from European rivals in the West and feared Chinese and Japanese influence in the East, while Siberia remained sparsely populated but rich in resources. The answer was the Trans-Siberian Railway, an 8,000 plus kilometer line from Moscow to Vladivostok, began in 1891 under Alexander III and Nicholas II to unite European Russia with Siberia and the Far East. The goals were explicitly strategic: strengthen administrative and military control over distant provinces, deploy the troops rapidly to the Pacific frontiers, and channel the timber, mineral, and grains from Siberia to Western industrial centers and export markets. Financing was heavy, and the project often made more geopolitical than commercial sense, but it permanently altered Russia's map, enabling settlement, resource exploitation, and imperial projection into Asia. In the later decades, through the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and modern Russia, the line has remained a critical artery for moving military units and commodities across Eurasia. From Baghdad to California, from Bombay to Vladivostok, railways were not neutral development projects but vectors of power. Whoever owned the tracks owned the future. The Berlin-Baghdad line threatened British sea power. Chinese workers built the backbone of US continental dominance. Indian taxpayers financed railways that secured British rule. And Russia's Trans-Siberian line turned frozen wilderness into militarized corridor. Modern mega projects from oil pipelines in Caucasus to China's Belt and Road Initiative all follow the same logic: connect resources, markets, and armies, and you quietly decide which empire survives the next century. Thanks a lot for making this far in the video. If you liked the video, please tell us why. If you didn't like the video, still tell us why. Please subscribe to the channel to be updated about science, engineering, politics, and history.